has caused the muddle of importing the mere procedure of thought into the fact of nature. The entity, bared of all characteristics except those of space and time, has acquired a physical status as the ultimate texture of nature, so that the course of nature is conceived as being merely the fortunes of matter in its adventure through space. Thus the origin of the doctrine of matter is the outcome of uncritical acceptance of space and time as external conditions for natural existence. By this I do not mean that any doubt should be thrown on facts of space and time as ingredients in nature. What I do mean is the unconscious presupposition of space and time as being that within which nature is set. This is exactly the sort of presupposition which tinges thought in any reaction against the subtlety of philosophical criticism. My theory of the formation of the scientific doctrine of matter is that the first philosophy illegitimately transformed the bare entity, which is simply an abstraction necessary for the method of thought, into the metaphysical substratum of these factors in nature which in various senses are assigned to entities as their attributes, and that, as a second step, scientists, including philosophers who were scientists, in conscious or unconscious ignoration of philosophy, presupposed this substratum qua substratum for attributes, as nevertheless in time and space. This is surely a muddle. The whole being of substance is as a substratum for attributes. Thus time and space should be attributes of the substance. This they palpably are not, if the matter be the substance of nature, since it is impossible to express spatio-temporal truths without having recourse to relations involving relata other than bits of matter. I waive this point, however, and come to another. It is not the substance which is in space, but the attributes. What we find in space are the red of the rose, and the smell of the jasmine, and the noise of cannon. We have all told our dentists where our toothache is. Thus space is not a relation between substances, but between attributes. Thus, even if you admit that the adherents of substance can be allowed to conceive substance as matter, it is a fraud to slip substances into space on the plea that space expresses relations between substances. On the face of it, space has nothing to do with substances, but only with their attributes. What I mean is that if you choose, as I think wrongly, to construe our experience of nature as an awareness of the attributes of substances, we are by this theory precluded from finding any analogous direct relations between substances as disclosed in our experience. What we do find are relations between the attributes of substances. Thus, if matter is looked on as substance in space, the space in which it finds itself has very little to do with the space of our experience. The above argument has been expressed in terms of the relational theory of space. But if space be absolute, namely, if it have a being independent of things in it, the course of the argument is hardly changed. For things in space must have a certain fundamental relation to space which we will call occupation. Thus the objection that it is the attributes which are observed as related to space still holds. The scientific doctrine of matter is held in conjunction with an absolute theory of time. The same arguments apply to the relations between matter and time as apply to the relations between space and matter. There is, however, in the current philosophy, a difference in the connections of space with matter from those of time with matter, which I will proceed to explain. Space is not merely an ordering of material entities so that any one entity bears certain relations to other material entities. The occupation of space impresses a certain character on each material entity in itself. By reason of its occupation of space, matter has extension. By reason of its extension, each bit of matter is divisible into parts and each part is a numerically distinct entity from every other such part. Accordingly, it would seem that every material entity is not really one entity. It is an essential multiplicity of entities. There seems to be no stopping this dissociation of matter into multiplicities short of finding each ultimate entity occupying one individual point. This essential multiplicity of material entities is certainly not what is meant by science, nor does it correspond to anything disclosed in sense awareness. It is absolutely necessary that at a certain stage in this dissociation of matter a halt should be called, and that the material entities thus obtained should be treated as units. The stage of arrest may be arbitrary or it may be set by the characteristics of nature, but all reasoning in science ultimately drops its space analysis and poses to itself the question: here is one material entity, what is happening to it as a unit entity? Yet this material entity is still retaining its extension, and as thus extended is a mere multiplicity. Thus there is an essential atomic property in nature which is independent of the dissociation of extension. There is something which in itself is one, and which is more than the logical aggregate of entities occupying points within the volume which the unit occupies. Indeed, we may well be sceptical as to these ultimate entities at points, and doubt whether there are any such entities at all. They have the suspicious character that we are driven to accept them by abstract logic, and not by observed fact. Time, in the current philosophy, does not exert the same disintegrating effect on matter which occupies it. If matter occupies a duration of time, the whole matter occupies every part of that duration. Thus the connection between matter and time differs from the connection between matter and space as expressed in current scientific philosophy. There is obviously a greater difficulty in conceiving time as the outcome of relations between different bits of matter than there is in the analogous conception of space. At an instant, distinct volumes of space are occupied by distinct bits of matter. Accordingly, there is so far no intrinsic difficulty in conceiving that space is merely the resultant of relations between the bits of matter. But in the one-dimensional time, the same bit of matter occupies different portions of time. Accordingly, time would have to be expressible in terms of the relations of a bit of matter with itself. My own view is a belief in the relational theory both of space and of time, and in disbelief of the current form of the relational theory of space, which exhibits bits of matter as the relata for spatial relations. The true relata are events. The distinction which I have just pointed out between time and space in their connection with matter makes it evident that any assimilation of time and space cannot proceed along the traditional line of taking matter as a fundamental element in space formation. The philosophy of nature took a wrong turn during its development by Greek thought. This erroneous presupposition is vague and fluid in Plato's Timaeus. The general groundwork of the thought is still uncommitted and can be construed as merely lacking due explanation and the guarding emphasis. But in Aristotle's exposition the current conceptions are hardened and made definite so as to produce a faulty analysis of the relation between the matter and the form of nature as disclosed in sense awareness. In this phrase the term matter is not used in its scientific sense. I will conclude by guarding myself against a misapprehension. It is evident that the current doctrine of matter enshrines some fundamental law of nature. Any simple illustration will exemplify what I mean. For example, in a museum some specimen is locked securely in a glass case. It stays there for years. It loses its colour and perhaps falls to pieces. But it is the same specimen, and the same chemical elements and the same quantities of those elements are present within the case at the end as they were present at the beginning. Again, the engineer and the astronomer deal with the motions of real permanences in nature. Any theory of nature